Okay, thank you.
Your head is cut off. So how can we get you?
Oh. Excuse me for one moment.
That's good.
Okay. Willa is a poet, a multidisciplinary artist, curator, psychotherapist, and fighter practice. She is a recipient of the Oregon Book Award and has authored 6 poetry collections, including Rending the Garment, a series of linked poems about one Jewish family. Willa founded Oregon Jewish Voices, a reading series now in its 24th year. And I remember I was there the first, maybe the second year, at the Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education. Last summer, Willa had a one-woman exhibition at Astoria Visual Arts entitled Bookish, Ceramic, Sculpture, and Photography. She has offered readings and poetry workshops in Israel through Voices Israel Group of Poets in English, and has had poems in Tikkun, and most recently in Arc 30, a journal edited by the Israel Association of Writers in English. The Naked Room, Willa's new collection of poems, relates to mental health, which she will read from and will discuss this evening. To try to describe its force, I'll use the words of reviewer Ronnie K. Stevens. This is what he said. It is difficult to encapsulate what makes The Naked Room so special. Add Willa to the list of authors you turn to in your crises, in your own crises, and in the crises of others. About the craft of her poetry, I love this review too, by psychologist Lee Kravitz. This is what he says. Each poem is a polished stone that also retains its raw and rough texture, leaving readers moved by beauty and invariably changed. So now on to our reading together. Willa will first do a reading from her book. I will then begin a discussion of the book by asking her a few questions, and then it'll be your turn to ask the questions.
And how will they do that?
A housekeeping issue before we begin. We'd like to keep Willa's reading as fully in the flesh and present as possible. So we'll not be using the chat room tonight at all. When it comes time for the Q&A portion of our evening, we invite all of you here at Rob, and those of you in the Zoom room, to just raise your hand, good old-fashioned way, or use the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen on your computer, and I'll call on you. And Buff, who is our technology guru, will help me keep an eye out for who's next to ask Willa a question. And now, please help me welcome poet Willa Smith.
Thank you, Fran. There is a microphone, but I don't think I'm going to use it. I don't think that's necessary. I'm really delighted that you're all here, and those of you that are here on Zoom. And this is, for those of you that are on Zoom, you can't really see the full sanctuary, but I also make things out of clay, and in the corner that you can't see is a yard, which is a Torah pointer that I made. Some of you may know I also make things out of clay, so it's a real joy for me to be standing here and I actually can see it. It's so good to see you here in person and on Zoom in this dark time for Israelis and Palestinians. I want to particularly thank East Coast family and friends who have stayed up to watch, and all the people who are on Zoom. Thank you for being here. I want to thank Racial Public Office and Facilities Manager Tara Anderson, participant and programs coordinator, and members local Joel Benin and Eve Berry, who coordinate programming, and particularly Zoom Master Buck Narrative, for bringing this all together. Without her, I don't know what we would be doing. And I want to give special thanks to my friend and sister in poetry, Frances Payne Adler, who has agreed to be the discussant. She is also the poetry editor of Tikkun magazine. Before moving into my own poetry, I want to start by reading a poem by the great Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai, translated from the Hebrew by Hannah Block and Hannah Kronfeld. May I rest in peace. May I rest in peace. I, who am still living, say, may I have peace in the rest of my life. I want peace right now while I'm still alive. I don't want to wait like that pious man who wished for one leg of the golden chair of paradise. I want a four-legged chair right here, a plain wooden chair. I want the rest of my peace now. I have lived out my life in wars of every kind, battles without and within, close, combat, face to face. The face is always my own, my lover face, my enemy face. Wars with the old weapon, sticks and stones, blunt axe, words, dull, ripping knife, love and hate, and wars with newfangled weapons, machine gun, missile, words, landmines exploding, love and hate. I don't want to fulfill my parents' prophecy that life is war. I want peace with all my body and all my soul. Rest me in peace. The Naked Room, my new collection, is a true synthesis of my life as a poet and my life as a psychotherapist. It is a history of mental health treatment to the current day and is divided into sections that relate to mental health terms: asylum, case history, straitjacket, 50-minute hour, reality testing, termination, and I'll go into those. The Naked Room is the place you can truly be yourself, to say whatever you need to say. Hopefully, the psychotherapist's office is such a place. The cover, all my books, this is my 6th book, I have made an image for the cover. And this is an image I took at Oregon State Hospital Museum. Has anyone here been there? Oh, looks like one person has been. Well, if you could believe it, there's actually a museum that, for example, they have all of that, runs over the cuckoo's nest. But there's also this monument, which this is, and you can't really see it for those of you who are on Zoom, that is the actual canisters of cremains of people who died at Oregon State Hospital and were stored in copper canisters, very unceremoniously. I will read 1 or 2 poems from each section, starting with tiny monuments. And the first section is asylum, and that, as we know, is not seeking asylum. These are the literal places that used to be called asylums. The first poem is entitled Tiny Monuments, which are these canisters. Their epigraph reads, for David Mizell, who photographed canisters holding the ashes of mental patients at Oregon State Hospital. When human beings were still locked away for sadness, clinging like a marine layer, voices saying how awful they are, going fetal when cars backfire or corks pop. There were hounds at the Oregon State Insane Asylum, and when they ceased to be, they were cremated. If no one claimed a brother, a daughter, or a father, the ashes were kept in numbered copper canisters on pine shelves in an underground vault. Not infrequently, the water table rose, giving the forgotten homes uniquely their own, coated with efflorescence and mineral dazzle, where an alchemy of copper and water bloomed and burst into color. These tiny monuments to the scorned and unknown, the patinas of pink, bird sierra, ochre, aqua, and if you look closely, you will find moon craters, archipelagos, waterfalls, big dippers, and dunes with lone tracks. Many of the people who died and their cremains were put in these canisters were eventually reunited with their family members. So what you would actually see this monument are not the original cremains, but they're honoring people with their names and their dates and respecting the lives that they lived, as hard as they were. Now this next one is, funny, tragic. It's also from Oregon State Hospital Museum, but it's a found poem. So those of you who are poets may know, or even people who are visual artists, you probably know the famous Duchamp. And at the toilet, he made out a sculpture. He found it, and then once he said it's a sculpture, it's a sculpture. So poets do similar things. They put a frame. They find something that seems to be poetic, and then they use it. And that's what I did. This was on the Meshes board at Oregon State Hospital Museum. Admission criteria for Oregon State Insane Asylum in 1906. And I think you'll see that many of us might have been hospitalized. Here we go. Brain softening, childbed fever, Christian Science, disappointment in love, general debility, which means physical weakness, especially after an illness, idiocy, lead poisoning, masturbation, menopause, nervous prostration. I thought this one was really funny. Overstudy, puerperal trouble. What we think is probably similar to a postpartum depression. Removal of ovaries, spiritualism, suppressed eruption. I think if you think about that for a minute, you'll figure it out, especially the guys in the audience. Tobacco, worry. That was 1906. Happily, that is not the case. The next one is called, the next section is case history. So at the beginning, when you're first working with a client, you take a history. You want to know their experience, if they've ever been to therapy, their mental health issues, but also it's about their life. So this one, I think there's one or two people who are in the Zoom audience who may know who I'm referring to. This one is called Iron Lung, and I often write persona poem, which means writing in the voice. The I is not me. And this one is I'm imagining my Aunt Mashi and my Uncle Brad, who had polio. Iron Lung. If he could stand up, he looked like a spaceman in comics, his head sticking out a porthole. But my husband, who never spent a night not holding me except when he was deployed, cannot. He's stricken. He puckers his lips to kiss me. I bend over, my lips barely graze his. I want to coat his face with wet kisses, not in front of the other wives or their men, each in their own metal tank. Dr. Salk's vaccine talk means nothing. Will the only man I ever loved ravish me? When I give Sadie the robin's egg blue blanket with the frayed satin trim and her stuffed mohair deer, the crying stops. But during some visits so deep in myself, her fussy doesn't register. Everyone tries to comfort me. He will breathe on his own, but not he'll walk again. I won't leave his side. Attendants pull me and the other bereft brides off our broken men. Nurses force me to walk back to apartments with shiny appliances that give us comfort. The shiny appliances that give us no comfort. I'm expecting. Sadie rubs my tummy and pleads, no baby, puppy. The next one is also a poem about family history. This one is about my husband's grandfather, Vashnu Das Bagai, who died in March 17th, 1928. And this poem was published in Cocoon. It's a prose poem. So those of you who know about poetry, prose poems can have long lines. American history. Dr. Thind made history fighting to be Aryan. He was also my husband's godfather. Thind and his wife watched Robin at 4 while his mother was in labor. Soon his sister's head would crest between her legs. United States versus Bhagat Singh Thind went all the way to the Supreme Court. The justice agreed that Thind was technically a member of the Caucasian race. He was not Caucasian in the popular sense of the word, so thus deemed not white. His citizenship was immediately revoked, and it became un-American for all South Asians, including Robin's grandfather, Vashnu Das Bagai, to be naturalized or categorized as a free white person. Vashnu's right to carry an American passport or own Bagai's bazaar on Fillmore, which he scrimped to establish, was dissolved like words on a wet piece of paper, and his reason to wear a 3-piece suit obliterated. He booked a room in San Jose and wrote to his wife, Carla, well, dear, I have to leave you, and turned on the gas. I was raised with the phrase, no Negroes, Jews, or dogs allowed, warning me that I shouldn't get too comfortable. Robin and I are comfortable together. Our hands often find the other, and when we sleep at night, we spoon. The next one, Ralph, is somebody trying to come in? Should I?
Yeah.
No, okay. The next one is from the straight jacket section. And straight jacket, in that section, is literal straight jackets. I have a poem in the voice of a straight jacket, but it's much more about the emotional straight jackets people are put into, or the emotional straight jackets they wear themselves for their own suffering. This one, as I said, I often write the persona poem, but this one called She Was a Kennedy, and this might be familiar to you. John F. Kennedy passed the Community Mental Health Act of 1964, which paved the way for deinstitutionalization of mental patients from long-term confinement like his sister. So does anyone know what happened to Rosemary Kennedy? Anyone who's sitting in front of me? Like, none of you knows that tragic story?
Yes, but you tell us.
Okay. Okay, so this poem, and if you saw this on the page, basically Rosemary Kennedy now would be considered a high-functioning developmental delayed person. And so her biggest issue was maybe 4th or 5th grade was her writing level, and she had a lot of trouble with spelling. So if you saw this on the page, you would see I have a lot of spelling errors, and the type that they use is kind of like a handwriting type. And so you'll hear Rosemary Kennedy's voice. I did a lot of research from books about her life, and you'll hear her father's voice. This is the title of the section of She Was a Kennedy. Rosemary writes to her father, October 19th, 1939, London. Oh, and what I forgot to say, that's important, that she did have lobotomy in 1941. Rosemary writes to her father, Daddy, you know I'll do anything to please you. All that I'm the oldest girl, I'll never be as smart as Joe, Jack, Eunice, or Kit. But the reporter said, in my white gown, when I was presented to the Queen, I was more beautiful. I hate the war and the Germans. If it wasn't for them, I would still be an assistant teacher reading and singing with the adorable little ones. I would still be at Assumption with Mother Isabel and all the nuns who loved me so much. Her father talks to himself. 80 have been treated surgically already. I respect Dr. Friedman, who says she'll be less impulsive and misbehave and would no longer do something indecorous than might derail her brother's careers. He described the procedure to me in great detail, knowing I can't bear to watch or contemplate, if unsuccessful, that my beautiful, trusting daughter could possibly become even more impaired. Not merely slow, but an imbecile without language. There will be no sedation, so each cut can be monitored. What I don't want to imagine is that she won't welcome having her glossy hair shaved, her hands and feet strapped to a table, her terror in hyperventilating as a burrow hose is trooping into her skull. He assures me there is some levity. Patients are told to sing. My Rosemary will comply and belt out her favorite tunes. You are my sunshine, when you wish upon a star. Letter to her father, May 5th, 1940, Washington, D.C. Daddy, you know I'll do whatever will make you happy. Do you think the surgery will make me less impatient and more smarter? I hate St. Gertrude. The nuns are so mean. I just have to get at them sometimes. It's like a prison. You know, I'm 22. Sometimes I run out of there late at night. The city is quiet. I like hearing the clicking of my heels against the sidewalk. Boys talk to me. I know you worry about me and boys. Don't worry, Daddy. The nuns always find me and tuck me in. The next poem is from the 50-minute hour section. And for those of us here, that's pretty standard, 50 minutes. But in New York, it's already 45. But that 50-minute hour is pretty much, kind of the standard. So we're moving into the actual experience of a therapist practice. And this one is called To Inhabit the Body. You tell me that as soon as those protrusions sprouted, you know they didn't belong. They felt alien, you say, as the frilly pastel undies your mother made you wear. Grown, your body becomes your canvas. You are sleeved up with blue snakes coiling your arms, their tongues darting out underneath your chin. You understand it is different from me, that I don't want a permanent testament to anyone inked in my skin, and that when my chest was renamed breast, I welcome those modest orbs. You tell me that no one will ever talk at your tits again. We both agree that's a perk for you, and that jerks ogling me is my burden for liking mine. And you will awaken from surgery, relieved that underneath your bandages, your chest is flat like a door, which opens into a garden where you find yourself inhabiting the body you were meant to wear. And I am just going to read 2 more poems, and one of them is in the reality testing section. So that would be, do you know the day? Do you know your name? Do you know the president? So that'd be more likely if somebody might be in an emergency room and somebody seems to be acting psychotically. They may ask those kinds of questions. This first poem in the section is not really about that, because it said, even though these poems, some relate to mental health, but some are larger. And this is about talk about reality, 2 different realities. Oh, and this is called Tasters. I went to a literary event the other day, and I learned that in Rome, they had slaves who were the official tasters. Now, it's not like, does it taste good? It's like, the taste is, will you be poisoned? Because the emperors were often being poisoned. So Hitler had similar fears. Tasters. Hitler is a vegetarian. You hold a crust in your cheeks. I want you to see that there's developing a juxtaposition. And if you saw it on the page, one is 2 different kinds of scripts that direct the reader. Daughters of the Deutschland, taste his food on bone china. You gnaw on a potato peel. A rose petal is a swastika in the center of each plate. You suck on a fingernail of schmaltz. So those of you that don't know what schmaltz is, that's chicken fat in Yiddish. You suck on a fingernail of schmaltz. The girl with braids pulled tight against her skull puts the tip of an asparagus spear in her mouth. The water called soup won't stay down. The one with skyless blue eyes swallows creamy white cauliflower florets. Will she keel over? You palm a bit of turnip. The Führer doesn't butcher animals. Another Fräulein licks a perfect red pepper. There is a little room to lie on your side. Your head won't lift up. Your mouth is a pit. And the last one relating to what we're all experiencing right now, another war, feeling that it surrounds us. We're in encircled by it. But there's always been wars, and often they've been outside our frame. And this poem is about the Bosnian War. And I wanted to kind of begin and end with, this is more about the reality of what war does. Moonlight. This is in the voice of the moon. Moonlight. This time, the truck, the dirt road, the field is in Srebrenica. He is packed in a battered, flat bed with other men, old, young, whimpering in fear. The truck lurches a few kilometers down a back road, 5 hauled out, 5 shots, a few more kilometers, 4 dragged out, 4 shots. Again, the truck comes to a halt. A boot on his rump pushes him out. His wrists tied, he lies face down, hears gunshot, hears gunfire, tastes blood, perhaps his own. Crabgrass marks the man's face. His nostrils are forgetting how to take in air. The moon is full. In all directions it stares at human beings past sorrow. And now this man, the weight of his silenced body pressing into the unfurrowed field. Thank you. And I think now I will move for the question part of this event. I'm gonna get some water.
Thank you, Willa. I wish some of the folks in the Zoom room would turn on their faces.
And that'll be great.
It would be so nice. And Buff, I wanted to ask you, can you unmute?
I just did.
Oh, good.
So I was going to tell people.
Thank you. Thank you.
You can unmute yourselves now.
How nice to see you. Actually see you.
Some real faces. All right. Okay, so I'm going to ask Will a few questions and start off the discussion, and then after that, we'll throw it open to the room and to the Zoom. Thank you, Will, for a beautiful reading. There's so much truth in your book. And I was looking through some of your essays as well as rereading your book. And I came across your essay, Capturing the Essence of Things, in which you said, writing is about truth telling, and emotional truths, not factual truths. Don't you love it when you hear your words coming out to you?
Especially words I haven't thought about for a
Long time. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to think about them, and can you talk more about this in terms of the poems in your naked room?
Yeah, I think that that's such an important point that you're making, that the nature of literature is about emotional truth. That's why we know that we can be really moved by a story that we know isn't factually true. And so these stories are not about actual people that I know. They're kind of based on the essence of what I hope people can feel about what is truly matters. Because I think that truth is so subjective, especially now in all this fake news time. But so to me, this is about that emotional truth, like the poem that I can use as a good example of inhabiting the body. To be able to have that experience of realizing you're not living in the body that you should be living in. And you have freedom to make your body, the body that you know is truly yours, is a truth. And I'm so happy to be able to try to capture that emotional truth, what that means, what it means for me who happens to be happy in this body, and what it's like for someone who isn't, and how, with the bravery to find a way to have a body and make it your own truly.
That's an excellent example. Yeah, I really felt that when you were reading the poem. How does and this is a question I think we all ask ourselves as poets, or maybe we don't. How does a poem come to you?
My last 3 books I conceived as linked poems, meaning they all relate to each other. One is about when I went to Cambodia, and I like to do this kind of historic, which I did in this book too, moving from the past to the present. So I took the mythic time, the French colonial period, and then the time when I worked with the UN. And my last one is about my parents, and called Bending the Garment, one Jewish family in Brooklyn. So I think it's very different for me now than when I was younger, when it would just be, oh, I'm going to write a poem. I still have that. I still have that feeling. I have to write something that will just come to me, that something I've read, something I've experienced, I have to write that poem. Sometimes it starts as a journal entry, sometimes the poem just spills out and I kind of hash it at first draft before the critic comes in and you start seeing what's wrong with it and how much revising. But I think there's a different focus. I had a real sense of certain, like this book, for example, certain aspects of mental health history and of the practice itself that I wanted to include. So I think it's both. I think it's that inspiration that just comes over you, and then there's also the time when it's just, okay, I feel like I want to write about this, and it feels a little less passionate.
Right. So when did you first recognize this theme when you wrote this particular poem, that particular poem? What was do you remember the moment at which the poems spoke to you as a collection and said, this is what I'm about?
Yeah, I think, it became really clear to me after I went to Oregon State Hospital and saw the remains and saw the fact that it was like, a lot of times you might have a section. Okay, those poems are a section. And I've always had poems relating to mental health or relating to strong emotional states throughout my books. But this felt like, okay, I needed this history. I needed to show some of the things that I'm not proud of being part of this profession, and things that I feel have changed for the better. But we know one of the poems is deinstitutionalization, that started by Kennedy, and I believe he really did that because he felt so terrible about his sister being locked up, even though in a very lovely place for the rest of her life. We didn't create the infrastructure for people to live independently the way we hoped. We certainly see that in Portland today. So I felt like I needed to address what's the joy of being part of this field, but also the ways that it has to be changed, the social justice aspect, the way that people who desperately need to get support are not able to even see that it's an option for themselves. So I felt like it needed to be not just about Willa's psychotherapy practice, but much more something larger about the field. It became clear to me that these sections spoke to me.
Thank you. You have several persona poems in your book, and I just want to say the love poem about the straitjacket, of course, is a persona poem, but I've never heard you read it before, but I never heard you talk about emotional straitjacket. And I thought that was really, you just named it there. And I wanted to know, can you talk about the persona poem? What it is, not only what draws you to it, but what it is, what the longing of it.
I think the confessional poets have done poetry, it would be too strong to made people feel, I say, like Robert Lowell or Anne Sexton, that the I was very close to the poet. And I think it's very important that people can feel that their emotions matter and should be valued. But I think that it's unlike fiction, people can write an I, you don't assume it's the author. So why can't poets do that as well? I think the I can be close to the poet, or it can be the creative imagination as you could imagine the I. And I believe walking in someone else's shoes, creating a non-duality, which is, I can have empathy. I can get inside your life that is not mine. I think that we are so often felt that we only can write from our direct lived experience. Like I should only be writing as a Jew from New York who has Buddhist tendencies. That's it. I think we should be able to write and have a creative imagination that is vast. And it's about, if we're going to write in the voice of someone other than ourselves, it has to be with respect, it has to be with research, it has to be knowing people. But I think because some of the writing in the past have perpetuated stereotypes, that there is concern for good reason if you're going to embark in writing in a voice other than your own. But I think it's a way, especially now, to create empathy and to have a life larger than your own personal struggles.
Especially now. Especially.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, excellent. If you were the one asking the question, what would you have asked yourself that I haven't asked?
That's a great
Don't
question.
you love that?
Well, I'd probably ask you, what poems speak to you the most? What are the poems that, when you read them, I think you and I have talked about that. Sometimes it's like we can't believe we actually wrote them, because we know you enter a zone and something comes through you. That's the creative process. That makes it so magical. And so I can say that there are some poems that I look at and I say, really? I wrote that? I was able to enter that space and write that. Other poems, I can say, yeah, I wrote that, it's okay. But some of them, it's that sense of awe that I hope, we all can feel when we're reading literature, even if it happens to be our own.
So then part B of that question is, can you pick out one poem from your collection that you did actually feel that sense of awe? That's like asking to pick out a favorite child.
Yeah,
But it really isn't, because the issue is the awe aspect.
Yes, I think that's really.
Not about a favorite. It's about the awe.
And I think, my husband will have to forgive me, but it is this poem that I love, and I feel that when I read it. And this is Percy Shelley, the poet, and it's called Shelley's Heart. We talk how easy it is to jump holding hands, to die at the same moment, sprint over the half window of our high-rise downtown, crumple on the ground, our eyes open. Percy Shelley's fragile craft, capsized Neil Laverna, his heart in a furnace of iron refused to burn. Mary of Frankenstein, Mary wrapped her beloved broken punk in a page of his elegy to Keats. They were together for 10 years. We have more than double that, and we tripled that. If you are taken from me, I won't hold your heart in my cupped hands, swaddled in your words. Go deeper. Equanimity is not the goal. I caress your Buddha earlobes, pinch your ass, shapeless inside your torn jeans. Hear your voice resonant and sure as a singing bell, and in bed, you on your back, my side, body, and neck nest into you, as if we would always fit that way.
Beautiful. Beautiful, thank you. So, we're living in deeply troubled times. So, I'm wondering, as a therapist, what would be your advice about how to stay mentally healthy in these brutalizing times?
Well, people certainly come in and talk to me about how what's happening in Israel-Palestine is affecting them. And I think it's important for people to feel their grief and feel their horror and the tragedy of it all and what war does. And so I think for people to be able to feel that they can express it and they are heard and they are seen. I think often what we would call ill health is because people feel they don't have a right to feel their emotions. They don't have a right to have strong emotions. And I don't mean only happiness. And next week I'm going to do a workshop about that, writing poems of strong emotions. But I mean really happy, really joyful also. So I think people need to be given permission that they can feel things profoundly and deeply.
Thank you, thank you. So I'd like to open it up to questions. And so those of you in the Zoom room, you have a question, just raise your hand, and same in the room, anyone who has a question. Percy.
Sure. You talked about this a little bit when you were talking about writing in the persona poem. And you talked about it in sort of a theoretical way. And so the question that I had was about the poem where you're writing in the voice of your aunt. What was it like for you to write that poem, and what were some of the things that you thought about maybe during the editing or the revision process?
That's a good question. Like my book before this is often in the voice of my mother and my father. So it was a lot easier to write when people are dead because they don't, they don't have an opinion anymore. So that's very liberating. But I think, Fran and I have talked about this also, that sometimes we have to write what we need to write and we can't think about how other people may respond, because then again, we're self-centering. Self-censoring ourselves. So, as I said, that's the thing. It's my aunt is not my aunt. It's my uncle is not my uncle. Once it's on the page, it becomes fiction because you have created a narrative through language that changes it from the lived experience or the reality. It becomes something else. And so this is Willa's view of what Mashi felt about Brud. Somebody can have a very different view, but I know how much she loved him. And she was a woman of her era, and to have her husband, who got polio in his 20s after they already had one child, was beyond devastating for her. And so I knew he was in an iron lung for a year. So I did a lot of research because he was one of the guys who got polio right before the vaccine was invented. And so I just sensed what that must have felt for her and what it must have felt, you know, her own guilt for being not as available to her daughter because she was so in so much grief, you know. So it is it's imagining. It's as I said, it's like what's empathy? It's imagining the life of someone else, deeply imagining it, so you can feel it for them. Is that
Yeah, great answer.
Anyone else? I see a hand. Okay.
Nancy has a question?
Let's see, I turned off my mute. Okay. So Willa, I know you, of course, as a poet, but also as a visual artist. And so I'm interested in the first poem you read in which you responded so much like an artist to the canisters that are in the asylum. So I'm sort of wondering how your art and your response to art interacts with both your left brain research and your right brain empathy towards some of the people you write about.
You know, there's kind of a weird echo, Judy, I'm sorry to say. So maybe you can like.
Shall I type it in the chat?
No, you can't do it,
No.
you dismantled it. Just say it again, I just didn't hear it as well as I.
Not sure I could say it exactly the same way, but I know you are a visual artist as well as a poet. And in response to the first poem you read that involved the canisters, there's such a gorgeous description of the corroding that's turned all the colors. I'm just wondering how your response to art and your left brain research and your right brain empathy all kind of come together in your poems. And is that something you find you need to balance, or is art often an inspiration for your work?
I heard it fine this time. I think it's like creativity comes from the same well. And sometimes I just feel like visual art is what's speaking to me, and sometimes it's the word, you know, and so I think and we know, I mean, Judy's also a poet, that we know that poetry is painting a picture with words. We are getting the person to see that image through language. So I think that I have to see it first. You know, I recently had a show relating to books. So I had to see those books in my mind, which would be the same thing as the process I have when I'm writing poetry. I have to see that image. So they really are very connected. I see it kind of on a continuum. And you know, that they kind of, but sometimes one speaks more to me than the other.
Thank you.
Roland is up there with his hand raised.
Yeah. Did somebody else have their hand raised?
Roland.
Right. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, Willa. Good to see you. The question I'm having for myself as a poet, and I imagine for you as well, is how to process the events in Israel that they may be tangled now, but may be expressed in paper at some other time or on the keyboard and that. Would you mind explaining what your process with those events are currently?
So if I understood you right about how to write about what's happening now?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can say my friend over here just wrote a wonderful poem on what's happening now. But for many people, and I think I'm one of them, that I need to be outside of it longer. I feel like it's like I am too close. You know, when I worked in Cambodia and, you know, met people who survived the killing fields, it really took me almost a year before I could really enter writing those poems about the killing fields. So I just think everyone finds their way. And are you saying for you, are you beginning to write, or you feel like you're just too feeling too emotional about it to be writing.
Right. So I have about 1,200 poems dancing around in my head, probably none of which will end up on paper. That's it, because there are too many triggers. That's a bad word these days, but there are too many triggers, and that's it. My process is ultimately I know it will settle.
Yeah, so I think you're making a good point, is sometimes, you're feeling, and that to me would be a time to write in your journal. And know that eventually those will become poems that you can say live as poems, as opposed to strong emotional feelings.
Right. Thank you. Love your work.
So is Nancy have her
It's the
hand raised?
cursor, it's the cursor, it's not her hand. Really.
It's a cursor? Oh.
Yeah, but I would like to, so I was fascinated by the titles of the chapters or the sections, of course, but the one that struck me, I mean, there were several things that, just really pulled at my heartstrings, but the idea of the 50-minute hour in the context of this whole work, and the whole mental health thing, because my experience of it is that you have the 50 minutes and then they end, and the hour ends, except that it doesn't really end, because everything that's happened during that time has to go somewhere. So I just, I'm fascinated by that concept, and how you're, every single one of the poems that you read tonight still left us thinking, so what's the rest of the story? For me, it's like, I want to know, then what, and how does this turn out? And I'm not very good at just leaving it be, letting it be, so I always want to know the rest of the story, but I thought that was really interesting. And
Well, I think there are some poems that are more directly about that experience, and I think, you being a therapist, I think what we share is that we carry that within us. So the hour ends and we're still carrying our clients inside us. And so I have poems about dreams that I've had that relate to clients. I have poems about confidentiality, and one client walks in, another one has just left. They'll never know anything about each other, but I'm carrying what one person was feeling so strongly, another, so there's a lot that I purposely directed a little bit more towards Jewish themes because of, and larger than just the practice, but the book itself is a lot really more mental health focused than what I actually read tonight. And it is very much about what that's like to feel like people are entrusting you with the deepest things they care about, and that sense that you don't want to disappoint them. You want to feel like you can really be there for them. So I think that, and the honor, it's an honor that people feel safe enough to really talk to you about what they feel most deeply. So I try to get that across in this collection.
well, of course, the naked room. I mean, just the image of, how many different levels is there nakedness?
Exactly.
And vulnerability and intimacy.
Exactly, so you got it. That's why when that title is sort of like when you were saying to me, like, how do you know, how does the poem come? That title just came to me as so clearly the title, because I wanted it to describe, you walk into this room where you can feel that you could be as emotionally naked, say whatever you need to say, that nothing is off limits, because the person is there, has positive regard for you. Thank you.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Other questions, anyone? I have a question.
Okay.
Can I, shall I? Okay, so, What do you hope to leave the reader with?
I hope to leave the reader with a sense of empathy, to really feel that we all know struggle, and we all know what it feels like to not always feel valued. And when you read this, I'm hoping that people feel like, okay, there is a place, even though I am talking about abuses or earlier history where things were not, where people were not treated. The field, for example, as you know, there were psychologists who actually helped to come up with a torture treatment that we know now was actually used at Guantanamo. They created it. So I have a found poem about that. So that I think it's important that this happens, but at the same time, there's great healing that goes on. And I wanted a person to be able to feel that sense of both, and to see themselves in these poems, just like I see myself in every poem I've written, because that's the empathy. I know that suffering too.
Anyone else? Well, in addition, Willa, to being a poet and a ceramic artist and a photographer and a sculptor, I experienced you as a teacher. And so thank you for this. Reading, the discussion afterwards, answers to your questions. Just beautiful, thank you. So I just want to announce again that, which I didn't do before, that Willa will be teaching a poetry workshop titled Discussion and Writing Poems of Strong Emotional States on Tuesday, November 14th at 7 p.m. here at Havara, in person only, this one.
Right. Only in person, because I want to create that environment where people feel safe to write, to share if they choose, or not share, but to be able to feel like we're all together and in a space. I think Zoom is wonderful for a reading, but I think for a workshop, it's preferable for us all to be literally sitting together. So for those of you on Zoom, I wish you could be here for that, but if the ones who live in Portland and just happen to not be out and about, it'd be great if you came. It's next Tuesday at the same time at 7.
Right, right. So there are still spots available, I understand.
Yeah, we're getting very close though. There's I think about 12 now, so.
And the limit is?
Well, I never made a limit, but we're getting close.
Okay, okay. So I'm looking at my watch and I think we have time for one more poem. How about we close with a poem?
Okay, so then maybe I will get up so people can see me better.
And I will move over here.
Yes. I have a question for any of those people who do know my poetry. There's a few people who do. Do you have a poem you'd like to hear? I was hoping that maybe Robin might have a poem you'd like to hear. I think you're being shy tonight. So, okay. Nancy, you have one?
Oh, hi there. I do, Willa. How about Italian plums?
Okay. Yeah, this poem, I'm so glad to read this poem. This one is a poet named Sarah Lance, who was a close friend and had brain cancer and died too soon. Italian plums for Sarah Lance. We climb up lichen-encrusted limbs to pluck purple, black fruit, protected with white powder that hides their sheen. We're inundated with plums, burdened by bounty. Why do we merit this small happiness? Plums boiling down in the big stainless steel pot, mason jars brimming with jam, brown paper bags bulging with enough for everyone. If only the plethora of plums could bring you back, but their days are even shorter than yours. They have burst their skins and are staining pavement. You are alive, but are no longer, and will not savor the juice of even one small plum. Beautiful.
Thanks, Willa. Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you both for a wonderful experience, illuminating and most enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you too. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay.
And thank you, Nancy, for the plum suggestion. That was the one that I was going to pick too.
Wow, how do you like that? We're thinking alike tonight. That's wonderful. And to honor another poet, so
Thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate it. And
yes,
I want to thank Fran for being such a wonderful discussion.
yes. Thank you, Fran. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
And thank you for the audience who are here physically. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.